The cold arrived early that year. The forest stiffened under ice, and every breath turned sharp and visible. She knew the open land would not forgive mistakes. When the first storm buried the trail behind her, she chose the cave, not as a hiding place, but as a line drawn against winter itself. The cave was older than memory. Wind whispered through its mouth, measuring her resolve. Inside, the stone walls absorbed sound and fear alike. She studied the space quietly, learning where the air moved, where it rested, and where silence felt warm enough to trust. There would be no flames to rely on, no smoke, no sparks. She worked with patience instead of heat, shaping a shelter that fit the cave like a second skin. Every choice mattered. Every small improvement stacked against the cold outside. When night fell, the temperature collapsed. The world outside froze solid, but inside the cave, time slowed. She listened to her own breathing and waited for the cold to claim its due. It never did. The shelter held. The dark passed. Days became measured not by hours, but by survival. She learned the cave's moods and the quiet strength of stillness. Winter raged beyond the stone walls, but inside, something steady took shape. This was no longer endurance. It was adaptation. Stone was not cold by nature. It was patient. She learned how the cave stored warmth during the day and released it slowly at night. By adjusting her shelter to the cave's natural curves, she turned stillness into insulation and silence into comfort. Every movement cost energy. She moved only when it mattered, conserving strength as carefully as food. The cave taught her restraint. In doing less, she preserved more: heat, clarity, and the will to continue. Blizzards screamed across the mountains, sealing the world in white. Inside the cave, the storms became distant rumors. Snow stacked high at the entrance, thickening the barrier between her and the cold. What threatened others became her shield. Darkness stretched endlessly. Without fire, light was a memory. She counted time by her heartbeat and the slow drip of melting frost. Isolation pressed in, but the shelter remained constant, holding its fragile warmth against the frozen void. Weeks passed, then months. The temperature outside remained unforgiving, but inside the cave, survival became routine. The shelter did more than protect her body. It proved that understanding the environment could overcome brute force. Survival became a series of calculations. How long to rest? When to breathe slowly. Where warmth gathered and where it escaped. She treated heat like a resource, guarded carefully, never wasted, always respected. The cold did not give up easily. Some nights it pushed harder, slipping through cracks and shadows. She listened, adjusted, reinforced. The shelter evolved with each challenge, shaped by failure and refined by persistence. Hunger arrived softly, then stayed. She learned to accept it without panic. Patience became nourishment of its own kind. The cave rewarded calm decisions and punished haste. Control, more than strength, kept her alive. The greatest battle was not against ice or wind, but against doubt. Alone in the dark, her thoughts echoed louder than storms. She disciplined her mind as carefully as her body, keeping fear from freezing her resolve. One morning, the cave felt different. Subtle, almost imagined. The cold still ruled the land, but it no longer deepened. Time, once frozen, had begun to move again. Winter was losing its grip. Small changes began to appear. Ice at the cave's edge softened during the day. The air felt less hostile, less sharp. She did not celebrate. Survival had taught her caution. Still, the signs were there, written quietly in melting frost. She did not rush outside. Instead, she observed from within, studying the light, the wind, the smell of the air. The cave had been her world for so long that leaving it too quickly felt dangerous. Survival was knowing when not to move. Even as the cold weakened, she maintained a shelter. Complacency had no place here. The structure had earned her trust through months of silence and endurance. She honored it by keeping it intact until winter fully released its hold. Memories of open land returned slowly. Trees without snow, water that flowed instead of cracked. The idea of warmth beyond stone felt distant, almost unreal. The cave had changed her sense of comfort and safety forever. One morning, the entrance stood clear. No drifting snow, no screaming wind. The winter that had trapped the world at -30 degrees Fahrenheit had finally fractured. She stood at the threshold, alive, steady, and unchanged in one crucial way. She had endured. She stepped outside slowly, letting her eyes adjust to open space again. The land looked familiar, yet distant, as if seen for the first time. Survival had narrowed her world to stone and breath. Now it expanded all at once. The cave was not just shelter, it was a teacher. It taught patience, awareness, and respect for limits. She understood now that survival was less about conquering nature and more about listening to it carefully. Her body carried the marks of the season. Movements were deliberate, efficient. Nothing was wasted. The winter had stripped life down to essentials, and those lessons stayed with her even as the cold retreated. Before leaving, she looked back. The shelter remained, quiet and intact. She did not dismantle it or mark it as hers. Survival had never been about ownership, only about balance and knowing when to move on. As she walked away from the cave, the story changed. This was no longer about enduring the cold. It was about what came after, how a season of silence reshaped a life, and how survival could become wisdom. Distance did not erase the cave. It followed her quietly, shaping how she saw the world. Every gust of wind, every shadow of stone carried reminders of nights spent listening to silence and trusting what could not be seen. Warmth was no longer just temperature. It was stability, stillness, control. She understood now that heat could exist without fire, just as strength could exist without force. The winter had rewritten her instincts. Some stories resist words. When others asked how she survived, she spoke carefully, leaving out the quiet fear and the long darkness. Survival, she learned, is personal. Not everything needs to be explained to be true. The outside world moved quickly, too quickly. Noise replaced wind. Motion replaced patience. She carried the cave within her, slowing her thoughts, grounding her steps, refusing to forget the value of restraint. Though the season ended, the winter remained alive inside her memory. Not as trauma, but as proof. She had faced -30 degrees Fahrenheit without firewood and endured. That knowledge became a permanent source of calm. Long after the winter ended, she found herself thinking about cold places again. Not with fear, but with familiarity. The memory of the cave no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a reference point for everything that came after. She applied what she had learned to every challenge. Observe first. Act second. Waste nothing. Panic never helped, but patience often did. The cave had trained her to see solutions where others saw only limits. Her survival did not announce itself loudly. There were no dramatic victories, no visible trophies. Strength revealed itself quietly, in confidence and restraint. She had learned that endurance rarely demands attention. The cave shelter became more than a physical place. It turned into an idea she carried with her, a reminder that protection could be built anywhere if one understands the environment well enough. Even years later, extreme cold no longer unsettled her. She had lived through -30 degrees Fahrenheit without firewood and remained whole. That calm, earned in silence and stone, stayed with her permanently. Silence became her ally. Without noise or flame, the cave taught her how stillness could preserve warmth and focus. In that quiet, she found strength that did not demand movement or effort. Long after leaving the cave, the discipline stayed. She planned carefully, wasted little, and trusted observation over impulse. Winter had trained her habits as much as it tested her endurance. The cave remained as it was, unchanged, unclaimed. No marks, no proof, only stone and shadow. The shelter did not need to be remembered by others to have mattered. She understood now that warmth could be built, not burned. It came from knowledge, restraint, and respect for the environment. Fire was never the answer. Understanding was. The winter ended, but its lessons moved with her. Wherever she went, she carried the calm of survival and the certainty that adaptation, not force, was what kept her alive. After the winter, the world felt louder and faster. Wind no longer threatened her, and cold no longer dictated her decisions. What once felt hostile now felt manageable, almost familiar. She understood that survival was not luck. It was knowledge applied patiently, moment by moment. The cave had proven that preparation and awareness could replace force and excess. There was no need to tell the story loudly. Survival did not require witnesses. The strength she gained was quiet, steady, and internal, unchanged by recognition or silence. Somewhere in the mountains, the cave still waited, empty, cold, and timeless. It held no memory of her, yet it had shaped her completely. That balance felt right. Endurance was no longer an act. It became part of who she was. The winter at -30 degrees Fahrenheit without firewood had passed, but the resilience it built would never leave. With time, the sharp edges of the experience softened. The cold no longer felt immediate, but the lessons remained clear. Memory turned survival into understanding rather than fear. The winter took comfort, ease, and certainty. In return, it gave awareness, restraint, and confidence. The exchange was uneven, but it was fair. She no longer needed much. Excess felt unnecessary after months of relying only on what mattered. Simplicity became a choice, not a sacrifice. There was a calm certainty in knowing her limits and her capabilities. She did not test them recklessly. She respected them, trusting experience over impulse. The story did not end with escape or celebration. It ended with continuity. Life went on, shaped by a winter survived at -30 degrees Fahrenheit without firewood, steady and unbroken. Cold became a reference point rather than a threat. When conditions worsened elsewhere, she measured them against that winter and found perspective. Few things felt absolute anymore. She learned to listen before acting, listening to weather, to terrain, to her own limits. The habit slowed decisions, but it made them stronger. Survival had taught her the value of patience over speed. Even when the mind moved on, the body remembered. It reacted instinctively to drops in temperature, conserving heat, adjusting posture. Those responses were no longer learned. They were embedded. Restraint guided her choices. She avoided waste, noise, and excess. The discipline born in the cave quietly shaped how she lived, long after survival was no longer necessary. There are no photographs, no records, no witnesses. Yet the proof existed, in her calm, in her decisions, in the way she faced uncertainty. Survival did not need evidence to be real. Not everything that matters leave a mark. The winter left no scars on the land, but it reshaped her judgment, her patience, and her sense of risk. Those changes were invisible, yet permanent. From then on, hardship was measured against that season. Few moments felt unbearable after living through -30 degrees Fahrenheit without firewood. The memory became a quiet standard she carried everywhere. She no longer believed survival was about fighting nature. It was about balance, knowing when to act and when to remain still. The cave had demanded harmony, not resistance. Life moved forward without acknowledging what had happened. Seasons changed, people passed through, stories rose and fell. Her survival did not interrupt the world, and it did not need to. The winter was over, but its meaning endured. She had faced isolation, cold, and silence, and remained intact. Survival did not transform her into something else. It revealed who she already was. After the story ended, life continued in small, ordinary ways. Mornings arrived without threat. Cold returned only as weather, not as danger. The past no longer demanded attention. Survival did not make her fearless. It made her precise. She understood risk clearly and respected it. Confidence came not from bravado, but from knowing exactly what she could endure. Silence never felt empty again. It became familiar, even grounding. The long quiet of the cave had changed how she listened, to places, to people, and to herself. The cave no longer existed as a location. It lived as memory and principle, a reminder that shelter can be built anywhere when attention replaces urgency. The winter did not end her story. It strengthened its foundation. She moved forward unchanged in spirit, carrying the calm of endurance and the certainty that she could adapt when it mattered most. Time gave her perspective without erasing detail. The winter no longer felt close, yet remained precise in memory. It shaped how she evaluated problems, clearly, calmly, without exaggeration. Comfort took on a different meaning. It was no longer softness or ease, but reliability. Knowing what truly mattered allowed her to feel settled in places others found difficult. Fear did not disappear, but it lost authority. She acknowledged it, assessed it, and moved forward anyway. The cave had taught her that fear was information, not a command. Whenever conditions grew uncertain, her mind returned to that winter. The reference was steady and unemotional. If she endured that, she could endure this. The comparison brought clarity. There was no final lesson, no closing statement. She simply continued, steady, observant, and grounded. Survival had done its work, and life moved on. Even as years passed, a certain quiet stayed with her. Not silence, but composure. The kind that comes from knowing panic is optional and clarity is earned. The winter no longer replayed itself in detail. It existed as a memory of capability, a reminder that limits are often closer to perception than reality. She never felt the need to prove what she had done. Survival was complete the moment it happened. Recognition would not add meaning to what was already real. The world remained cold at times, unpredictable, indifferent, but it was no longer overwhelming. She met it with understanding instead of resistance. She did not carry the cave with her, nor the winter itself. She carried endurance, quiet, steady, and unremarkable. Life continued, and she continued with it, unchanged in essence, strengthened by what she had survived. Even when the mind moved on, the body remembered. It reacted instinctively to drops in temperature, conserving heat, adjusting posture. Those responses were no longer learned. They were embedded. Restraint guided her choices. She avoided waste, noise, and excess. The discipline born in the cave quietly shaped how she lived, long after survival was no longer necessary. There are no photographs, no records, no witnesses. Yet the proof existed, in her calm, in her decisions, in the way she faced uncertainty. Survival did not need evidence to be real. Not everything that matters leaves a mark. The winter left no scars on the land, but it reshaped her judgment, her patience, and her sense of risk. Those changes were invisible, yet permanent. From then on, hardship was measured against that season. Few moments felt unbearable after living through minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit without firewood. The memory became a quiet standard she carried everywhere.